The day I sold my dead husband's car, I found the one thing that turned 23 years of marriage into a lie. Everyone told me grief was making me paranoid. My daughter thought I was looking for problems that didn't exist. I almost believed them. Then I found a hidden USB buried inside his glove compartment. What started as a few strange files led to years of secret bank transfers, a woman I'd never heard of, and a little boy who looked so much like my husband it made my stomach drop. By the time I unlocked the safe deposit box he left behind, the truth had already delivered its own revenge. My name is Adeline Mercer, and this is how I discovered that the man I buried was hiding an entire part of his life from me. Chapter 1. 5 weeks after Julian died, I learned that grief had a sound. It was not crying, it was not the silence people always talked about. It was the hum of the refrigerator at 3 in the morning when the rest of the house felt abandoned. It was the creak of floorboards that made me turn my head before remembering there was no one walking down the hallway anymore. It was the soft vibration of my phone every time another payment reminder arrived. I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of envelopes I had already opened twice. Electric bill, insurance statement, vehicle payment notice. A final reminder printed in bold letters that seemed almost angry. I rubbed my eyes and pushed the papers away. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. Julian would have noticed that. He noticed everything. That thought hit me harder than it should have. For 23 years, my husband had started every morning the same way. He woke before sunrise, ground fresh coffee beans, and wandered through the house half awake while humming songs he never remembered the names of. For most of our marriage, I found it annoying. Now I would have given anything to hear it again. I stood and carried the mug to the sink. Outside, a gray Oregon morning hung low over the neighborhood. Rain clung to the windows. The backyard looked untouched. Everything looked untouched, as if the world had forgotten to notice that mine had ended 5 weeks earlier. A door opened upstairs, then closed again. Rowan. My daughter had perfected the art of disappearing while remaining inside the house. I glanced at the clock. Almost noon. She had barely left her room all week. I climbed the stairs and knocked gently. No answer. I waited. Still nothing. Finally, I pushed the door open a few inches. Rowan sat at her desk, wearing headphones. A textbook was open in front of her, though she clearly was not reading it. "Honey," she pulled one side of the headphones back. "Yeah? You want something to eat?" "Not hungry." "You haven't eaten breakfast." "I said I'm fine." The answer came quickly, automatically, like she had practiced it. I nodded, even though she was not looking at me anymore. "Okay." The door clicked shut behind me. That was our conversation. 1 sentence for me, 2 from her. Better than yesterday. The realization made my chest ache. When Julian was alive, Rowan talked nonstop about school, friends, college applications, random videos she found online. Now, every conversation felt like knocking on the door of an empty house. Back downstairs, I found myself staring through the kitchen window again. The sedan sat in the driveway exactly where Julian had parked before going to work that last morning. Dark blue, clean, perfectly maintained. He loved that car, not because it was expensive, it wasn't. He loved it because he took pride in caring for things. The car, the lawn, the house, us. At least that's what I had always believed. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Rowan at 14 after a soccer game, mud covering her uniform, Julian laughing while pretending to inspect the damage, then taking her to ice cream anyway. Another memory followed. Julian spending an entire Saturday helping an elderly neighbor repair a fence, refusing payment, coming home sunburned and exhausted. That was the man everyone knew. Dependable, patient, kind. The sort of man who remembered birthdays and returned shopping carts. The sort of man who volunteered when nobody asked. The sort of man people described as solid. I used to think solid meant permanent.
I knew better now. My phone buzzed again. Another payment notification. I picked it up and stared at the screen. The numbers no longer scared me. They exhausted me. After Julian died, everyone said the same thing. Take your time. There is no rush. Be gentle with yourself. None of those people had seen our bank account. None of them were making monthly payments alone. I looked toward the driveway. Then I looked away. Then back again. The decision felt disloyal. Necessary, but disloyal. I whispered the words anyway. The car has to go. Saying it out loud made it real. For a moment, I expected guilt to crush me. Instead, I felt something worse. Relief. That afternoon, I grabbed a cardboard box and headed outside. The rain had stopped. The air smelled damp and cold. When I opened the driver's door, Julian's scent was gone. That hurt more than I expected. I sat behind the wheel for a second, hands resting where his had rested thousands of times. Then I forced myself to move. The center console came first. Old receipts, napkins, a flashlight. Nothing important. The trunk held emergency supplies and a folding chair from one of Rowan's soccer tournaments. I carried everything inside, made another trip, then another. The process kept triggering memories I never asked for. Julian singing badly to classic rock, Julian arguing with navigation apps, Julian insisting every road trip needed snacks. I laughed once, then immediately felt guilty for laughing. Eventually, only the glove compartment remained. I opened it expecting paperwork. Instead, I found sunglasses, a parking pass, vehicle maintenance records, an owner's manual. Normal things. I started to close it, then noticed something black wedged deep in the back corner. At first, I thought it was part of the compartment. I reached inside. My fingers brushed smooth plastic. Confused, I pulled it free. A USB. Small, black, unmarked except for a single white sticker. I stared at it. Why would Julian hide a USB there? The question felt harmless, yet something about it made my stomach tighten. Maybe it contained work files, old tax documents, photos, something ordinary. I slipped it into my pocket anyway. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Dinner came and went. Rowan barely touched her food. Neither of us mentioned it. By 9 o'clock, she had disappeared upstairs again. The house settled into silence. I carried my laptop to the kitchen table. The USB sat beside it, waiting. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was probably nothing. Still, my pulse quickened as I plugged it into the computer. A folder appeared instantly, then another, and another. Dozens of files, letters, photographs, PDF documents. I clicked through them slowly. Then I froze. One folder sat near the top of the screen. A single name stared back at me. Marina. I'd never heard that name before in my entire life, yet for some reason, I couldn't look away.
Chapter 2. My cursor hovered over the folder for several seconds before I finally clicked it. 27 files appeared. Most of them were documents. A few were photographs. Several had dates stretching back years. My mouth went dry. Years. Not months, not weeks. Years. I opened the oldest document first. It was a letter. Not a formal letter, not business correspondence, just a simple note. Marina thanked Julian for helping her understand paperwork she could not navigate on her own. She wrote about being overwhelmed, about feeling alone, about being grateful someone had treated her with kindness. Nothing inappropriate, nothing alarming. I opened another, then another. The pattern continued. Updates about life, questions, expressions of gratitude, stories about daily struggles. At first, I almost laughed at myself. Maybe I had imagined everything. Maybe Marina had simply been someone Julian helped through his work. That explanation fit the man I knew. Julian had spent most of his career helping people solve problems nobody else wanted to touch. It was exactly the sort of thing he would do. Relief began settling into my chest. Then I opened a letter dated 3 years later. The tone had changed, not dramatically, just enough. Marina mentioned a restaurant Julian had apparently recommended. She joked about his terrible taste in movies. She referenced a conversation that clearly happened outside any professional setting. I frowned. The next letter felt even more personal. Then the next. A strange pressure started building behind my eyes. I kept reading. The deeper I went, the less professional everything felt. Certain phrases repeated, private jokes, memories, moments, the kind that only existed between people who knew each other well, very well. I leaned back from the screen. No, there had to be another explanation. People became friends, friends shared memories. That did not mean anything. I repeated the thoughts several times. None of them sounded convincing. Then I saw the name for the first time. Eli. It appeared halfway through a letter. Eli had another fever this week. Thank you for checking on him. I stared at the sentence. Who was Eli? I opened another document. The name appeared again. Eli loved the telescope. He talks about it constantly. Another. Eli asked when he would see you again. Another. Thank you for being there when he needed someone. Another. He still keeps the baseball glove you bought him. I sat motionless. The room felt smaller. Every letter seemed to orbit around the same child. Eli this, Eli that. Eli misses you. Eli asked about you. Eli wants to show you something. The familiarity disturbed me. Julian was not simply helping someone. At least that was no longer what it looked like. I rubbed my temples and checked the clock. Almost midnight. I should have gone to bed hours ago. Instead, I opened one more file, then another. The child kept appearing. Eventually, curiosity pushed me toward the photo folder. My stomach tightened. There were dozens of images. I clicked the first. Marina stood beside a picnic table in a public park. Nothing unusual. The second showed a little boy smiling while holding a science fair ribbon. The third stopped me cold. Julian stood beside them. My pulse jumped. He looked relaxed, comfortable, happy. Not the polite smile he used with clients, not the professional expression he wore in work photos. This smile was genuine, the same smile I had seen at birthday parties, family vacations, Christmas mornings. I opened more pictures, a baseball game, a zoo visit, a community event, a birthday celebration. Every image included the same three people, Marina, the boy, Julian, together, again and again. I felt something sharp twist inside me. Not certainty, not yet, but something dangerously close. Then I opened a photograph that nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. Julian sat on a park bench. The boy stood between his knees. Julian's arms wrapped around him naturally, protectively. The child leaned into him without hesitation, without awkwardness, without distance, as though he had done it 1,000 times before. I stared so long the screen dimmed. When it finally went dark, I saw my reflections staring back, confused, hurt, afraid. I woke the screen again. The image remained exactly the same. The smile on Julian's face felt painfully familiar. For years, I believed that smile belonged to Rowan and me. Now, I wasn't sure. A floorboard creaked upstairs. I quickly minimized the folder. A moment later, footsteps descended the staircase. Rowan entered the kitchen wearing an oversized sweatshirt. She stopped when she saw me. You're still awake? Apparently. She opened the refrigerator, stood there for several seconds, closed it again. You should sleep. So should you. Her eyes drifted toward my laptop. What are you doing? Nothing. That answer came too quickly. Rowan noticed. Mom. What? She folded her arms. You're investigating something. I looked away. It's not important. Then why do you look like that? I didn't answer. The silence stretched. Finally, she stepped closer. Is this about Dad? My throat tightened. Maybe. What does that mean? I don't know yet. She stared at me, then at the screen, then back at me. Whatever you're doing, stop. The words surprised me. What? You heard me. Rowan. No. Her voice sharpened. He's gone. You don't need to dig through every piece of his life looking for problems. I'm not looking for problems. Then what are you doing?
I looked at the laptop. I didn't know how to explain it because I barely understood it myself. Rowan shook her head. Dad was a good man. I know. Then let him rest. She turned and headed back upstairs. Halfway across the room, she stopped. For a moment, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she said quietly, "Sometimes people just need to leave things alone." Then she disappeared upstairs. I sat there long after she left. The house felt heavier than before. The next morning, I opened our online banking records. I told myself it was only curiosity, nothing more. The first transfer appeared immediately, then another, and another. The same recipient, month after month, year after year, regular amounts, predictable amounts, thousands of dollars altogether, far more than I ever imagined. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Julian had hidden this for a very long time. A very long time. Every discovery made the next one easier to believe. The impossible slowly became possible. The possibles started becoming likely. By late afternoon, I found myself opening documents again, reading dates, comparing records, searching for patterns. Then I noticed a file I had overlooked before, a lease agreement. I clicked it open. My pulse quickened immediately. The address wasn't in Portland. It wasn't anywhere near our neighborhood. It was an apartment in Rainier Valley. I read the address twice, then a third time. The document listed years of occupancy, several signatures, one familiar name, Julian Mercer. I slowly closed my eyes. For the first time since finding the flash drive, one question rose above all the others. Who exactly had my husband been when he wasn't with us?
Chapter 3. The address sat on a sticky note beside my laptop for almost 2 days before I finally got into the car. I told myself I was only looking, nothing more. I was not confronting anyone. I was not accusing anyone. I was not ready for either of those things. Rain tapped lightly against the windshield as I drove south through Seattle traffic. The closer I got to Rainier Valley, the tighter my grip became on the steering wheel. Every red light gave me another chance to turn around. Every mile gave me another reason to stop. Maybe Marina was an old client. Maybe Eli was a nephew. Maybe there was an explanation hidden somewhere between all the documents and photographs. I repeated those possibilities so often they began to sound rehearsed. Julian was a good man. Julian helped people. Julian would never destroy our family. The words felt weaker every time I said them. When navigation announced I had arrived, my heart started pounding. The apartment building was older than I expected. Nothing remarkable. A small brick complex with neatly trimmed bushes and bicycles chained near the entrance. Children's chalk drawings decorated part of the sidewalk. Laundry fluttered from several balconies. Ordinary, painfully ordinary. I parked across the street and waited. 5 minutes, 10, 15. I almost convinced myself to leave. Then the front door opened. A woman stepped outside carrying 2 grocery bags. I knew immediately it was Marina, not because I had met her, because I had already spent hours staring at photographs. She looked older than the pictures, more tired. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose knot. No makeup, no dramatic elegance, no glamorous mystery, just a woman carrying groceries home. The realization unsettled me. For days, I had imagined her as some larger-than-life figure, the woman who somehow existed in a part of Julian's life I had never seen. Instead, she looked completely normal, human. That somehow made everything worse. I stayed where I was. Marina disappeared back inside. A few minutes later, the door opened again. This time, a boy burst outside. He bounced down the steps carrying a basketball almost as large as his torso. My breath caught. Eli. He dribbled across the pavement while talking to himself, laughing, missing shots, trying again. I watched him for less than 30 seconds before my entire body went cold. The shape of his smile, the way he tilted his head while concentrating, even the way he ran. It hit me with brutal force. Julian. Not identical, not enough to prove anything in court, more than enough to haunt me forever. I stared until guilt forced me to look away. The child had done nothing wrong, yet simply existing had shattered something inside me. I drove home in silence. The city blurred beyond the windows. I barely noticed traffic, barely noticed time passing. My mind kept replaying the image of Eli laughing with that basketball. Every memory of Julian suddenly felt contaminated. I remembered business trips, late meetings, unexpected phone calls, tiny details I had ignored for years. A dinner interrupted by a text message, a weekend conference that seemed unusually short, the occasional moment when Julian appeared distracted. At the time, none of it mattered. Now, every memory demanded re-examination. By the time I reached home, I felt exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, like I had spent the entire day carrying something heavy. The house was quiet, too quiet. Rowan's bedroom door stood open. I paused. That alone felt unusual. She normally kept it closed. I walked upstairs. The room was empty, but her laptop remained on the desk. The screen was active. For a second, I considered walking away. Then I noticed what was open, the flash drive. My stomach dropped. Rowan had found it. I stepped closer. Several photographs filled the screen. Marina, Eli, Julian, the same images I had seen. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned. Rowan stood in the doorway. Her face looked pale. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "How long have you known?" I swallowed. "A few days." "A few days." The disbelief in her voice stung. "You didn't tell me." "I didn't know what to tell you." She laughed bitterly. "I think you could have started with Dad having a secret life." "Rowan." "No." Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't get to tell me to calm down." I stepped forward. She stepped back. The distance felt enormous. "I was trying to understand it first." "Understand what?" Her voice cracked. "Those photographs?" I remained silent. That was answer enough. Rowan looked toward the screen, then back at me. "Who is that kid?" "I don't know." "That's not true." "I don't know for certain." The distinction meant nothing to her. It barely meant anything to me. She shook her head. "I thought you were overreacting." "What?" "When I first saw you looking through Dad's files." She wiped her eyes angrily. "I thought grief was making you paranoid." The words hurt, not because they were cruel, because I had thought the same thing. I wanted that to be true, I admitted. For a moment, she looked very young. Not 17, not almost grown, just a frightened child trying to hold on to her father. Then she pointed at the screen. "That doesn't look like paranoia." I followed her gaze. One photograph remained open. Julian stood beside Marina and Eli beneath strings of lights. A celebration. A birthday, maybe? Something important. Something he had never mentioned. Rowan stared at the image. "I've never seen this." Neither had I. What was he doing there? I had no answer. The silence stretched. Then suddenly her sadness transformed into anger. "You knew." The accusation stunned me. "What?" "You knew something was wrong." "I didn't." "You had to." "Rowan, stop." "You spent years with him." I said stop. The words came out sharper than intended. She froze. I froze too. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she grabbed her backpack from the floor. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving." My chest tightened. "Don't." "I'm going to Grandma Vivian's." "Rowan." "I'm catching an Uber." I hadn't even heard the car. A horn sounded outside, right on cue. My heart broke a little more. "Please." The word escaped before I could stop it. Rowan looked away. I don't know who he was anymore. Neither did I. She opened the door, then paused.
For 1 second, I thought she might stay. Instead, she whispered softly, "I miss him so much." Then she left. I stood alone in the hallway long after the front door closed. The house felt emptier than it had the day of the funeral. Later that night, I returned to the flash drive, not because I wanted answers, because I no longer knew how to stop looking. Hours passed, document after document, photograph after photograph. Then, near the bottom of a folder, I found something I hadn't noticed before, a scanned page, partially cropped, easy to miss. Most people probably would have skipped over it. I nearly did. Then a single phrase caught my attention: safe deposit box authorization. I leaned closer to the screen, suddenly wide awake. Julian had hidden enough secrets already. The terrifying question was whether I had reached the end of them or only the beginning.
Chapter 4. Sleep became impossible after that. The image of the safe deposit box authorization stayed in my mind long after I shut the laptop. Every explanation I had constructed over the past few days had collapsed. Whatever Julian had hidden, he had hidden carefully, deliberately. The next morning, I began searching through everything he had left behind: desk drawers, file cabinets, storage bins in the garage, closet shelves. I felt guilty doing it. Every object carried traces of the man I had loved: his watch collection, old legal pads filled with notes, ticket stubs from concerts we attended years ago, photographs from vacations. For brief moments, I forgot why I was searching. Then I remembered Marina, remember Eli, remember the apartment, and continued. Hours passed without success. By late afternoon, frustration was replacing grief. I sat on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by open boxes and scattered papers. "Come on, Julian," I whispered. My voice sounded strange in the empty room. "If you wanted me to find it, where is it?" The answer appeared 30 minutes later, inside a polished wooden box he rarely opened, a box that contained cufflinks, old tie clips, and a few sentimental keepsakes. At the bottom sat a small brass key. Nothing about it looked remarkable, yet the moment I picked it up, I knew. My pulse quickened. I turned it over in my hand. A tiny number was engraved on one side. I closed my eyes. For several seconds, I simply sat there breathing. The search was over. Now came the part I feared. The following morning, I drove downtown. The bank occupied an older stone building overlooking a busy intersection. People hurried past carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Normal life continued around me. Mine felt suspended somewhere between the past and whatever came next. Inside, a customer service representative greeted me. "How can I help you today?" I placed the key on the desk. "I need information about a safe deposit box belonging to my late husband." Her expression softened immediately. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." The process took nearly an hour. Death certificate, identification, estate paperwork, verification forms, signatures, questions. The practical side of death rarely appeared in sympathy cards. Eventually, a manager joined us, a gray-haired woman named Karen. She reviewed the documents carefully, then nodded. "Everything appears to be in order." My stomach tightened. "So I can access it?" "Yes." She stood. "Please come with me." The hallway leading to the vault felt longer than it probably was. Each step echoed. Each second increased the pressure building inside my chest. Karen unlocked several security doors. Finally, we entered a quiet room lined with metal boxes. She located one near the center wall. After inserting her key, she stepped aside. "The rest is yours." Then she left, alone, exactly as I had feared, exactly as I needed. My hand trembled slightly as I inserted Julian's key. The lock clicked. I pulled the box free. For a moment, I simply stared. Part of me wanted to close it again, to leave, to preserve whatever remained of the man I thought I knew. Instead, I opened it. The contents were surprisingly ordinary: folders, documents, a flash drive, several sealed envelopes. Then I noticed something folded beneath the papers: a birth certificate. My heart stopped. Slowly, I lifted it from the box. The name Eli Alvarez appeared near the top. I scanned downward. Mother, Marina Alvarez. Then farther. Father, Julian Mercer. The world seemed to tilt. I read the line again, then again, each time hoping the words would change. They never did. The silence inside the room became unbearable. Not suspected, not possible, not maybe, confirmed. The little boy I had watched playing basketball was Julian's son. My husband had fathered a child with another woman. A sharp breath escaped before I could stop it. I covered my mouth. For years he had sat across from me at dinner, helped Rowan with homework, held my hand at hospital visits, celebrated anniversaries, made promises, all while carrying this secret. The birth certificate slipped slightly in my hands. Beneath it rested an envelope. Marina's name was written across the front. I stared at it. For the first time since this nightmare began, a strange clarity settled over me. I could keep imagining who Marina was, or I could finally hear her side of the story. When I left the bank, the Seattle sky had begun to clear. Sunlight pushed through the clouds for the first time all week. I stood beside my car holding the envelope in my hands. Then I made a decision. I was going to see Marina. Not to punish her, not to accuse her, not even to forgive her. I simply needed the rest of the truth. Chapter 5. The meeting happened 3 days later in a small coffee shop near Green Lake. I arrived early, not because I was eager, because waiting at home had become unbearable. The envelope addressed to Marina rested inside my purse. I had read Julian's letter so many times, the folds were beginning to wear thin. Outside, people walked dogs and pushed strollers beneath a sky that finally looked more like spring than winter. Normal lives, normal problems. I wondered if mine would ever feel normal again. When the door opened, I recognized Marina immediately. She spotted me at the same moment. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she approached slowly. "Adeline?" I nodded. "Marina?" Her voice was quieter than I expected. She sat across from me. Neither of us touched the menus. Neither of us pretended this was anything except what it was: a collision between two lives that should never have intersected this way. For several seconds, silence sat between us. Finally, Marina spoke first. "I always knew this day might come." I looked at her. "You knew about me." "Yes. And I knew nothing about you." Pain flickered across her face. "I know." There was no anger in her voice, only regret. I had prepared questions, dozens of them, yet the moment arrived and none felt important. Instead, I asked the simplest one: "Why?" Marina lowered her eyes. "Because he was afraid." I almost laughed. The answer sounded absurd, too small for the destruction it caused. But after reading Julian's letter, I understood exactly what she meant. Fear, cowardice, years of bad decisions built on top of one terrible choice. Marina wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "He talked about you all the time." I stared at her. "What?" "You and Rowan." I didn't know what to say. "He loved you." The statement hurt more than an insult would have, because I believed she meant it. "He had a strange way of showing it." "I know." Her eyes filled with tears. "Trust me, I know." For the next hour, she told me everything. Not excuses, not defenses, just facts. She described raising Eli alone, working 2 jobs when he was younger, sleeping at the kitchen table after midnight, stretching every dollar, trying to answer questions she wasn't prepared for, especially the questions about fathers. The hardest part came when she described Eli's illnesses. Nothing life-threatening, just enough hospital visits to frighten a single mother already struggling. Julian had helped, driven them to appointments, paid bills, sat beside hospital beds. Not as a husband, not even openly as a father, just a man trapped inside a life he no longer knew how to explain. "He never missed a birthday," Marina said quietly. I looked away. Because neither had he missed Rowan's. That was the impossible part. Two separate worlds, two separate children, one man desperately trying to belong to both. No wonder he failed. No one could succeed at that. By the time we finished talking, something had shifted inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but hatred had become impossible. Nobody sitting at that table had won. Not Marina, not me, certainly not Julian, and especially not Eli. Before we left, I handed her the envelope. Marina stared at the handwriting. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Then she pressed it against her chest. Neither of us spoke. Some things deserved silence. The following weekend, Rowan came home. At first, it was only for dinner, then a movie, then an overnight visit. Eventually, she stayed. The house felt different. Not healed. Healing was slower than that, but less empty. One evening, I found her sitting at the kitchen table reading Julian's letter. Again, she had already read it 3 times, maybe 4. I set down a cup of tea beside her. She didn't look up immediately. Instead, she stared at the final page. Finally, she sighed. "I hate what he did." I pulled out the chair across from her. "I know. I don't know if I'll ever stop being angry." "You don't have to." Rowan nodded slowly. Then she surprised me. "I still miss him." The words trembled. "I know that too." Tears appeared instantly. Not dramatic tears, the exhausted kind, the kind grief leaves behind. "He was still my dad." I reached across the table. She took my hand. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Sometimes silence carried more honesty than language ever could. A week later, I sat down and wrote a letter of my own. Not to Julian, not to Marina, to Eli. The words came easier than expected. I told him none of this was his fault. I told him adults sometimes make selfish decisions, and children end up carrying consequences they never deserved. I told him he was not a mistake, not a secret that should have remained hidden, not something shameful. I folded the letter carefully, then sealed it. When I finished, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because the pain was gone, because I had finally chosen what to do with it. The first meeting between Rowan and Eli happened 2 weeks later. Nobody expected miracles, certainly not me. We met at a public park, neutral ground, safe ground. Rowan spent the entire drive staring out the window. Eli looked equally nervous when he arrived. For an awkward few minutes, neither teenager nor child seemed capable of speech. Then Eli noticed Rowan's sweatshirt. "You like the Mariners?" Rowan blinked. "Yeah, me too." Silence. Then another question. Then another. Nothing profound, nothing life-changing. Baseball, school, favorite movies, normal things, small things, human things. I watched from a distance while Marina sat beside me on a nearby bench. Neither of us interfered. The conversation remained cautious, careful. Neither child suddenly embraced the other. This wasn't that kind of story. But when Rowan laughed at one of Eli's jokes, something inside my chest loosened. Just a little. Enough. As the sun began setting, we said our goodbyes. Eli waved first. Rowan waved back. A tiny gesture, yet somehow enormous. Driving home later, I thought about Julian, the man I married, the man who betrayed me, the man who spent years trying to hold together 2 incompatible truths. For months after his death, I wanted simple answers: hero or villain, truth or lie, love or betrayal. Life refused to cooperate. The reality was messier. Julian had been the man who held my hand during labor, the man who taught Rowan to ride a bicycle, the man who made terrible choices, the man who carried regret until the day he died. All of those things existed together. The secret had finally been exposed. Everyone who mattered knew the truth. Nobody could rewrite the past. Nobody could erase the damage. But for the first time, the future felt unwritten. The Mercer family would never return to what it had been. Maybe it wasn't supposed to. Maybe healing wasn't rebuilding the old life. Maybe it was learning how to build something honest from what remained. And before you go, I want to ask you something. If you were Rowan, could you eventually accept Eli as part of your family? And if you were in my place, would you choose forgiveness or would you keep your distance after learning a truth this painful?